Yes, sir. From Brown Slim Llama, anything we do. Let me tell you something. Send the Margulas and come, send the champion them come. Make them know say till a man in the doctor not go down. Who can stand the better run? Now no time for give me bone. It's load when the book is loaded, magnum. What the girl them a rush because them love always say. Get up with them on with them highway. In a me mansion them want come play. But I want thing here, me no bum. Woman think me mash up and swear say me jump. Me hand and me crackers eyes as on me come. Girl put me to the test and swear me never come. I get me want to catch her in a me bum. Make she wine me every wine same time me a pump. No worry girl me a go help you over the hump. The whole sugar cane dance sweeter than the bump. A 500 watt me a jump. Tell the model of them come, send the champion them come. When them know say till a man in the doctor not go down.
All right, y'all. So I want to talk about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning, really quick. Classical conditioning is a method that is used on primarily animals, namely dogs. Okay, but here's as Homo sapiens, what we have to remember is that of the 5 kingdoms, right? There's archaebacteria, there's bacteria, there's plant, there's the animal kingdom, and there's fungi. We belong to the animal kingdom of the 5 kingdoms. So when we talk about classical conditioning and it's being used on dogs, we have to remember, because we belong to the animal kingdom, classical conditioning applies to us just as well. We're being classically conditioned as well. Now, the fundamentals of classical conditioning it lies in this. You take a neutral stimulant, you pair it with a biological stimulant, and you produce a specific response. I'll say that again. The basis of classical conditioning is you take a neutral stimulant, you pair that stimulant with a biological stimulant, a natural stimulant, to ensure a specified behavior pattern. An example is if you take a steak, a piece of steak, a nice juicy piece of steak, you take that steak and you put that steak in front of an animal, namely, let's say a dog. That dog, that piece of steak is a natural biological stimulant. And what I mean by that is it's going to make that dog naturally salivate. So the dog begins to salivate at the sight of that steak. The salivation of the dog is a unconditioned response. Reason why it's unconditioned is because it is a natural biological response to salivate when you see food as a dog. The steak is an unconditioned stimulant. Again, natural steak, natural salivation by a dog, natural response. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When the steak is paired with a neutral stimulant in this case, let's say the neutral stimulant is a bell. Yeah, let's just use a bell. When the steak is paired with the neutral stimulant, a bell, when you ring that bell, the dog hears the bell and associates the bell with the steak. So again, you have a steak that allows the dog to salivate. When you take the steak and you pair it with a neutral stimulant, which is the bell, every time you show the dog the piece of steak, you ring the bell. Show the dog the piece of steak, you ring the bell. You show the dog the piece of steak, you ring the bell. You do these two things simultaneously. What you're doing is you're pairing the neutral stimulant, the bell, with the natural stimulant, the steak. And what happens over a period of time of this pairing is you remove the steak and just ring the bell, and the dog will give you the said response as if the steak was still there. This is what's called classical conditioning, folks. You pair a neutral stimulant, which is the bell, with a natural stimulant, biological stimulant, which is the steak, and you get the same specific behavior, the salivating by the dog. So every time the bell is rung, in the dog's brain, That bell has been paired with the steak, so the dog starts to salivate. So now that means I could walk past this dog, anybody at this point can walk past the dog, ring the bell, and the dog will biologically, naturally begins to foam, to salivate, to get an appetite, to become hungry. Folks, that is textbook definition of what's called classical conditioning. And that is a very, very deadly technique when used in by the wrong hands or the wrong powers. That's what is done to us human beings on a regular daily basis by advertisers, companies, sneakers, alcohol, any products that they want to sell. They pair it with a natural stimulant, and once again, we'll continue with the same bell just to keep it simple. Once that bell is rung, we human beings have a specific behavior that we are programmed to follow. And here's the science to that. What the powers that be understands is what's called brain wave entrainment. You can research it, you can Google it. I'll give you a really quick explanation, very terse and brief explanation of what brainwave entrainment is. Our brains, it's called frequency following, FF. Brainwave entrainment is a form of frequency following. Our brain waves naturally, because of what's called resonance, naturally follows certain frequencies. Naturally, this is without you even knowing. This has nothing to do with me, you, or anyone. This is a natural phenomenon that is somewhat unexplainable. It's a phenomenon. The brain naturally follows certain frequencies. It's called brainwave entrainment or frequency following. And this is part of the bioengineering of us as a species. Because remember, we are biochemical creatures. We're biochemically engineered. And our main functionality, the foundation of our functionality is electricity. Electricity is what allows us to move. We're electrical beings, electrical creatures. Read about the synode, which is the SA node, which is the heart's pacemaker, that electrical impulses, right? If you read about the neurons in our brain, our neurons fire off electrical impulses, and that's what creates our thoughts, right? And this is why it's important to get enough electrolytes into your body, but I don't want to stray and digress. The point is this: brainwave entrainment is a part of classical conditioning. When the brain waves are entrained, meaning they are synced to follow a certain frequency, and that elicits a specific response. So going back to the analogy of the dog, when the steak is paired with the bell and the bell is rung, without the steak, you can remove the steak at this point and ring the bell and you get the same response out of the dog. That response is called a conditioned response. And that stimulant is called a conditional or conditioned stimulant, because the bell has been conditioned with the steak. The response from the dog to salivate is a conditioned response. It's no longer just a biological, it's a conditioned. The reason why it's conditioned, because think about it. The dog is salivating and there's no steak. So he's been conditioned to salivate. So it's important that we understand that as human beings, they're pairing, okay? They're pairing their products with certain stimulants in our environments, and these stimulants that are in our environment are usually constantly there. So, and they're subliminal, they're below our subconscious awareness, they're below our awareness. So when these things go off, we behave a certain way. Whatever the stimulant is, when it snaps, when it triggers, it elicits a response, a specific response out of us. So the things that you see people do on a regular basis, when you scratch your head and wonder why, you got to understand that there's something else at play here. There's something else going on that's below the awareness, and that's classical conditioning. Behind it all is a form of classical conditioning. We have been synced and paired to stimulants in our environment, and all the powers that be have to do is just trigger one of those stimulants, and we unwittingly behave a specified way, because classical conditioning is designed to elicit a specific behavior. Remember, it's not just supposed to just make you act in haphazardly or just randomly. It's to make you act out in a very, very specified way. So it's important that we understand this. It's very important that we understand what classical conditioning is and how it's used on animals. And again, we belong to the animal kingdom, so we're constantly being classically conditioned as well. And when you can understand this, then and then only, you'll be able to resist their temptations. You'll be able to resist their allurements, enticements, and drawings. You won't be drawn away as easy. You won't be spending your money on, the latest gear and the latest this and staying, bankrupt because you're constantly trying to keep up with the Joneses. So again, folks, classical conditioning, this is just a real terse explanation of what it is. There's more to it. It's more in depth, but I want to keep it simple. The KISS principle, keep it simply simple, or keep it simple stupid. I just want to keep it simple. And this way, it can be digested by the audience and gestated. Remember, to gestate means to ruminate. And I always try to, I love this analogy. Cows, certain hooven animals, they eat their food, and when they swallow the food, they bring it back up and chew. It's called chewing the cud, and they chew on the food again to make sure they get all the nutrients and the ingredients out of it. And I say that to say that's a very good metaphor or to use to say, when we get information, it's important that we digest it and gestate, not just digest, but gestate. And gestation means to ruminate, means to bring it back up to your cognitive, the highest points of your divine mind, and to meditate on it and to ruminate, to mull it over and over and over, so that you can make sure you get all of what God's wisdom is in that concept or that teaching. You want to make sure you get the most out of it. You want to get you want to get as much as you can in terms of like enlightenment out of the knowledge. So gestate on that. Classical conditioning, kept it simple, what it is, and be mindful that your brain waves are being paired and to follow a certain frequency. And that frequency develops in your behavior. And this is why people have certain behavior patterns and paradigms. And they, excuse me. And this is why some people find it so hard to break free from certain habits. And again, the habits are a result of the brainwave entrainment and the frequency following and the classical conditioning and so on and so forth. So, hopefully this information was somewhat helpful. Until next time, y'all know what I'm going to be doing, cooking books and bringing information. Peace.